At 6:40 a.m. on November 13th, 2017, John Warner suffered from a heart attack after a spin class he attended that morning. A middle-aged 52-year-old male undergoing such a traumatic experience, sadly, is not completely unheard of. Except John Warner wasn't your average Joe 52-year-old. He was the voluntary president of the American Heart Association. Despite all the information and knowledge Dr. John Warner assembled throughout his career as an interventional cardiologist, why had he succumbed to this distressing event that even now plagues almost 92 million Americans living with cardiovascular disease or the after effects of stroke? Let's dive into a brief history of fats in today's video. In today's day and age, it comes as a stark realization that 1/2 of all middle-aged men and 1/3 of all middle-aged women in the United States of America will develop some manifestation of coronary heart disease. The 2016 Heart Disease and Stroke Statistics Update of the American Heart Association reported that 15.5 million people in the USA have coronary heart disease. What's more is that millions of non-overweight people are now harboring hidden fat in their organs, which leads directly to countless surprise heart attacks every day, as well as Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, and many other modern diseases despite rapid advances in medical technology. Strangely enough, this sorry state that we find ourselves in came about as a consequence of intense focus on a single molecule, cholesterol. We have all heard of cholesterol before, but do we actually know what it does in the body? Let's find out. Cholesterol is a waxy molecule essential for life, so much so that practically every cell in the body is capable of producing it. Cholesterol plays a major role in bone building, production of sex hormones such as testosterone and estrogen, and is of paramount importance to healthy brain and central nervous system function. And on top of all that, cholesterol is the base molecule our bodies use to produce essential vitamin D directly from sunlight exposure on our skin. In fact, cholesterol production is so important that your liver and intestines make up about 80% of the cholesterol you need to stay healthy. The other 20% comes from foods that you eat. Do you know of any other molecules that provide such value to the body? Given the significant impact of this single molecule in our bodies, it beggars belief that it is also one of the most hated, accused of causing heart attacks, stroke, and countless other problems. Cholesterol, it can be argued, has taken on the role of the Dark Knight, where for centuries it was one of the heroes of our body and has now been reduced to a heinous villain to be despised and rejected. So how did cholesterol come to be so hated? There are many reasons, but the main faults lie at the feet of a man named Ancel Keys. In the 1950s, many scientists believed that heart disease was a result of elevated cholesterol in the blood due to consumption of fatty foods. This theory wasn't completely absurd, as the plaque buildup in the seized coronary arteries of the heart contain moderate to high levels of cholesterol. Coronary arteries are basically the blood vessels that supply the heart itself with nutritious glucose and oxygen so it can keep pumping blood around our bodies for life. Following this theory of plaque buildup being caused by cholesterol was the simple trap of making what you could measure important rather than trying to measure what was important. For example, what really causes heart disease. This was simply poor academic research and a bad case of jumping to conclusions. Noticing that high levels of cholesterol are present in diseased coronary arteries should prompt the question, why is cholesterol present in diseased arteries, as opposed to a conclusion of, high cholesterol causes diseased coronary arteries. It must not be forgotten that Ancel Keys was a dominant figure in nutritional research in the 1950s. So much so that he appeared on the cover of the 1961 edition of the Time magazine. After that, it was only a matter of time until government officials took heed of his research. In 1977, a Senate committee led by George McGovern issued a document called the Dietary Goals for the United States, which would later become the Dietary Guidelines for Americans that we know today. This 1977 document had the profound effects of changing the dietary patterns of people that followed for generations. At the time the first nutritional guidelines came out, people in the United States had been following the same diet for decades with fairly stable levels of chronic disease. The new standards, however, encouraged people to reduce fat intake to approximately 30% of calories and to bump up carbohydrates to 50 to 60% of calorie intake. This was based off the assumption that reducing fat, especially saturated fat, would reduce the rate of heart disease. Since then, not much has changed in government nutritional dogma, as the 2015 to 2020 edition of the Dietary Guidelines for American states that a healthy eating pattern limits saturated fats and trans fats, and a recommendation to consume less than 10% of calories per day from saturated fats. This advice almost completely contradicts areas of the aforementioned 2016 Heart Disease and Stroke Statistics update of the American Heart Association, which state that in the Women's Health Initiative clinical trial of 48,835 participants, reduction of total fat consumption from 37.8% energy baseline to 24.3% energy had no effect on incidence of coronary heart disease, stroke, or total cardiovascular disease over a mean of 8.1 years. The report also goes on to state that each 5% of saturated fat in your diet that you replace with carbohydrate is associated with a 7% higher risk of coronary heart disease. For those unsure of the differences between all the types of fat mentioned so far, here is a quick Fats 101. Fats, also known as lipids, can be categorized into two main groups: saturated and unsaturated fats. Fats are an energy-dense macronutrient that provides 9 calories per gram, whereas proteins and carbohydrates provide 4 calories per gram. Mono and polyunsaturated fats refer to the number of these double bonds, which can be found in the molecule. Unsaturated fats have a higher degree of these double bonds, which is associated with their common state of a liquid and a saturated fats being a solid. Trans fats are actually a type of unsaturated fat with a particular molecular structure. Saturated and unsaturated fats both occur commonly in nature, while natural trans fats are very rare, with the majority of trans fats being artificially created. So how did Ancel Keys convince the entire American government, and thus the entire world, of his beliefs? With lousy research and bravado based on reputation alone. Ancel's diet heart theory states that dietary saturated fat increases levels of cholesterol in the blood, and high levels of cholesterol in turn increases the risk of coronary heart disease. He backed up his theory by highlighting correlations and associations between dietary fats and coronary heart disease. However, as many of us know, correlation does not simply equal causation in most instances. Here is a ridiculous example showing that as the use of Internet Explorer decreases, so does the rate of murders in the United States. What scientist would base their research on such ludicrous claims? So off went Ancel to spiel his beliefs about dietary facts with his hand-picked 6-country study at the World Health Organization Summit. Ancel's highly associational studies were eviscerated by 2 other researchers who displayed the full set of data that Ancel twisted for his own agenda. Humiliated and completely livid, Ancel Keys did not use this fateful opportunity as a chance to reflect and improve upon his actions and conduct randomized controlled experiments. Oh no, it only served as fuel to the fire, resulting with his return to associational studies with a vigor and producing the updated 7-country study, which would change the dietary course of the world for many years as we knew it. This only goes to show that scientific studies and experiments can be construed to tell whatever narrative you want to be told. Why the research was conducted, who it was funded by, and what aim they are trying to push is key when analyzing sources of evidence. Scientific research can be placed into 3 broad categories. Associational research, which essentially shows some correlation between 2 factors. It is perhaps the weakest category of research. The second category is mechanism evidence, which is basically just demonstrating that your cause makes technical sense. This category, despite not being as weak as associational research, is still not that strong. as you are basically stating the way something behaves should technically produce some kind of result which can lead to a lot of bias. Last, but certainly not least, is experimental evidence. In medicine, this refers to evidence obtained through experiments in randomized controlled trials, RCTs, the gold standard for determining cause and effect without bias. A randomized control trial is a study in which a number of similar people are randomly assigned to two or more groups to test a specific drug, treatment, or other intervention. One group, the experimental group, has the intervention being tested, could be a drug. The other, the comparison or control group, has an alternative intervention, placebo, or no intervention at all. The groups are followed up to see how effective the experimental intervention was. Outcomes are measured at specific times, and any difference in response between the groups is assessed statistically. This knowledge does paint a bit of a bleak picture in terms of reliability of research. However, most research is conducted by the right people in an ethical way. For example, research published by the Prospective Urban Rural Epidemiology, PURE, in 2017 tracked 135,335 men and women across 18 countries for 7 years. The article concluded that neither coronary heart disease nor mortality in general were associated with the intake of overall fat or saturated fat. Despite being fraught with methodological issues of its own, the research published by PURE is still more significant than that conducted by Ancel Keys in his 7-country study, who not only cherry-picked favourable countries, but sampled only a percentage of the dietary information provided by 12,700 men and no women whatsoever. The cholesterol narrative has distracted us from the genuine drivers of heart disease. It has also pushed us away from the healthiest diets. It has a lot to answer for. If you don't know the truth about cholesterol, your efforts to achieve longevity will be undermined, as has occurred for the millions before you, and doubtlessly for the millions that will follow you too. If you made it to the end of the brief history of facts video, can you answer these 3 final questions based on the information presented today? Don't forget to rate the video with a like or dislike, and hit subscribe to stay tuned for the next video.